Hello, Sovereign CEO. Welcome to today's podcast. I'm joined today by an amazing guest, Dave Guttman. Today, we are exploring the hidden identity of a nine-figure founder, a man who has built multiple nine-figure exits, and his core focus is on how high performers build at the highest level without sacrificing their souls. His deepest values are integrity, relationships, family, authenticity, and purpose. We will explore how a founder's inner world has an impact or becomes visible in the systems, negotiations, operations, culture, and hiring in the company that they are building. This is a conversation that will change your trajectory. Welcome, Dave.
Well, Jess, that was a heck of an intro. Thank you so much. Great to be here.
Thank you. Okay, so my first question. So looking at your career on paper, people would assume that success was your primary pursuit. But when I read your media kit and obviously looked at you on Instagram and loads of other stuff that you do, that is not what stood out. It wasn't business that stood out. It was integrity, relationships, meaning, and balance. So my first question is, what did success mean to you at 30 that doesn't mean to you now?
So, I don't know if you happen to stumble across this, in looking at some of my background, but when I was 24, I was misdiagnosed with terminal cancer and told I had 6 months to live.
Wow.
So so I just got accepted into Wharton Business School, and they told me I would be dead before I enrolled in the fall.
Wow.
So that changed the entire trajectory of my life, and I would say up until that point, my definition of success was more traditional, like, how most people think about, money and fancy stuff and whatever. I mean, I've never been a particularly materialistic person, but I like nice things and I like to travel and, stuff like that. And so I think I defined success in a pretty traditional way. And then I was told I was going to die, and that shifted my thinking, as you might expect.
Wow.
And ever since then, I made the intentional decision that I was going to let success be the side effect and not the goal. And what I realized, frankly, to my own surprise, was it became easier to be successful by doing that, and I enjoyed the journey so much more than I would have if I had done it the other way. I wasn't a bad guy before that, but I don't know if I'd even be friends with the 24-year-old version of me. I was too intense for my own good. Um, and honestly, it's just sort of that nothing will sort of humble you more than having to evaluate your life at 24. And what I realized was, other than having some family and friends be sad for a while, that it would not have mattered that I lived, and that genuinely bothered me. And so I just decided from that point forward, I wasn't gonna make it about me. I was gonna try to make it about the people that I cared the most about, and that ended up being a much happier way to travel through life.
So many things to unpack here. So I love that phrase, the side effect and not the goal. And when you said you were intense, what do you mean by that?
So I was a four-sport athlete in high school. I was a Division I college wrestler. I was a competitive triathlete after that. Like, I would train. I was psychotic. I would train. I mean, I helped my mom detox from alcohol when I was 9. My mom was an alcoholic, and so I never touched alcohol. I didn't have a drop of alcohol till I was 35.
Wow.
Like, not even like champagne at midnight on New Year's.
Yeah.
And I was about working out. I was about my career progression, getting into good schools, doing well in those schools. Everything was about, what had a specific, it wasn't even just enough that I had to achieve certain things. I wanted to achieve them by a certain age. And I, you know, I don't know that I was that fun, if I'm being
Wow.
honest, because I was just too focused. I mean, when I was in business school, I had 3 part-time jobs, so I was working 50 to 60 hours a week in a full-time MBA program. I wrote an article every week for the newspaper. I was sleeping maybe 3 hours a night, Sunday through Thursday for 2 years.
Mm.
I mean, I was just, I was a little bit nuts. So, and
Mm.
now, don't get me wrong, like, I work hard now. I'm supposed to be semi-retired, but I still probably work 70, 80-hour weeks. But the
Wow.
difference is I'm only doing things I like, working with people I enjoy, doing things I'm interested in. So it doesn't really feel like work. And so I've I've decided, I basically made the decision that I'm going to have, people talk about work-life balance. That's not really the way I'm wired. And so for me, what I do instead is I've integrated my personal and my professional life. All of my friends, all of them are either people that I've worked with in the past or that I'm working with now.
I love that. So what you're talking about is it's beautiful actually, because I know we haven't spoken about human design, but now I'm hearing generator because the highest we don't know, but the highest kind of pinnacle for a generator is alignment, and that is exactly what you're describing, like being fueled by your work and doing things that you love that light you up. But with that, and it's not separate. It's just part of what you do. Now, I have a question that just built on what you said before I move on, because there's so much. I'm so excited. So, legacy then. So, when you had this near death moment in life, that shaped how you decided you wanted to build the future. What does legacy in life? Because you said, it kind of made me think like, if I died, my life wouldn't have had meaning. So how did that shape your life, your business?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. It's been an evolution, and how I thought about it at 24 in the hospital bed is a little bit different than how I think about it now. And here's something that I read about years ago is, it basically asked the question, do you know the first name of your 8 great grandparents? Nobody, and I mean nobody I have ever met knows the first name of their 8 great grandparents. These are people you are directly descended from by a couple generations, and you don't even know their first name.
Wow.
So sort of the arrogance of thinking that 100 years or 1,000 years from now it will matter that I lived, it won't, right? And I'm okay with that. But what I wasn't okay with, and frankly, if I'm being, clear-eyed and honest about it, I admit that it's somewhat arbitrary. I didn't want it to not matter like right away. You know what I mean? And so what I decided was, the things you do ripple through other people, right? And it won't matter in 100 years or 1,000 years, but it'll matter in 20.
Yeah.
And that's enough. And I guess the other thing about it is, I mentor a lot of people, a lot of younger people too, like probably from the ages of 18 to 48, probably that range, a 30-year range. And these are people I care deeply about, and I'm very emotionally invested in their both personal and professional development. Um, and and so to me, the fact that I matter to them,
Hmm.
that's enough. And I guess the other thing that really drove me was for my entire life, I have sought out a mentor that was what I call a holistic mentor. Because
Mm.
to me, if I have a mentor, but they're only a mentor professionally or maybe health and fitness wise or, um, you know, intellectually or whatever it might be, that really can't be like a true mentor. That's more of like an apprenticeship than a mentorship, right? Like they might teach me, and I have had a couple of what I'll call professional mentors or apprenticeships where I had one person in particular that was an exceptional leader and my leadership and management style came directly from her. So, but her health and her personal life were a disaster.
Right.
I had another guy who was another professional mentor, taught me a ton about persuasion and influence. But again, personally and health wise, disaster.
Yeah.
So it's like, do I really want to take professional advice from someone that says, no, 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 don't go to your kid's little league game? So, and so I eventually kind of gave up on trying to find that mentor. And what I decided was I would become that mentor both for myself and for others. And that's really what I've tried to do. One of the kids I mentor, amazing kid. I'm actually co-authoring a book. So me at 60 and this kid I mentor, he's 18. He just turned 18. And we're co-authoring a book. You'll get a kick out of this called Life Maxing.
Lovely.
Um, and he's like a son to me,
Yeah.
and yeah, so it works out well for him too, I think, because um his mom had a sperm donor, so he doesn't actually have daddy is a biological father, obviously, but it works out for him, works out for me.
I've got goosebumps at that. I love this, and I'll tell you why. So in my previous life, I was an educator working with inner city London school kids. For 7 years, that was my career, and I was pretty obsessed. I was a complete workaholic, but it was because I had this big, big passion for service and for their lives, you know. But but then I burnt out when I was about 32 or something because I was working like 70, 80 hours a week. And so it kind of leads to the question, like, yes, I was so driven because their lives meant, like, empowering them to move out of poverty and to rise into their highest potential and being a mentor. But I wasn't in my holistic era then. So I was taking stimulants just to keep going because I'm not designed to work like that. And so I was very unhealthy. I didn't have that holistic balance. And when I burnt out, and actually 7 years ago, and started to rebuild my life, I went on a journey of how do I create a sustainable and a holistic path?
Mm.
And then how do I guide others? So I guess I'm curious then, because at 9 you helped your mum remove, like, kind of detox from alcohol. I wonder, like, you say you're wired like this. Do you, were you? What do you think created that kind of drive? Were there survival patterns? Because when I obviously look back at my life, I'm seeing, well, there was perfectionism, there was workaholism. So yeah, let's ask that. Is that question clear, or
Yeah,
should I?
yeah, no, it is clear. Um, so if you were to ask my mom, she would tell you that if I was born in a crack house, I would have turned out exactly the same. I don't think she's right about that, but I do think there's a big nature versus nurture aspect. Um, you know, the I don't. It wasn't. I have to understand. I just thought my mom was sick. I didn't
Mm,
realize till a couple years later that she was an alcoholic. So I just thought my mom was sick. My dad wasn't around. He was work. He was a workaholic. My brother was, doing his own. My older brother was doing his own thing, and so it kind of fell to me. And I just thought she was sick, and I was just worried about her, right? And
mm,
when I realized a couple years later that it was out, she told that she was an alcoholic. Um, it actually ended up being this very interesting blessing in disguise for a couple reasons. One, my mom was in recovery, so I saw her overcome her addiction, right? And the second thing about it was, once I started to get peer pressure around 12, 13, when kids started to drink and maybe experiment even a little bit with, like, drugs and stuff like that, there was no amount of peer pressure. I mean, no amount of peer pressure that would have gotten me to drink because I was so freaked out by it. I'm like, maybe it's genetic. I didn't want to take a chance. And so, but the gift that was kind of wrapped up in that was once you've kind of not caved to peer pressure the first time, it's not so hard the second and the third and the fourth time. And it sort of just put me into a direction where um, I learned to march to the beat of my own drummer.
yeah.
And that was a wonderful gift. I will say, I think I was born with a very intense drive, but
Um,
one of the things that, I've come to realize is people, and it's unfortunate, people who are very successful or, maybe they're famous or they're incredibly good looking or an amazing athlete or something like that, they they end up believing that they're special. And I think that's really dangerous. I
mm,
don't feel special. I feel fortunate. And there's
uh,
a big difference. If I were born, and I use this example, if I were born in sub-Saharan Africa dying of dysentery, it
mm,
wouldn't matter how loving my parents were. It wouldn't matter how high my IQ was. None of that would matter because I'd be dying, right?
mm,
I happen to be fortunate enough to be born in America to two loving parents who told me I could accomplish anything I wanted to. We weren't filthy rich, but we weren't dead broke. And I had decent, genetic raw materials. I just feel really fortunate. And, but I do think I was always kind of wired, um, for, to sort of be a little bit, um, very focused on, trying to do something meaningful.
mm. So, what kind of patterns do you repeatedly see in founders that create success initially, but then eventually create suffering?
Well, man, help me understand that second part. So when you say they create suffering, maybe just I just want to make sure I understand the question clearly. So what are you getting at there?
I guess then if they are hyper independent or they're driven, maybe like I was. So I guess I was so focused on my work and my career at the like you're saying, it wasn't holistic. So at the detriment of my health or at the detriment of my relationships. So maybe or even being controlling. So like micromanaging your team because you can't let go, because you can't build that leadership. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I get it now. So I think one of the big things, and I had this challenge earlier on in my life. Um, I think identity can be a huge challenge. So I have two. There's somewhere between friends and acquaintances. One had like a 50 or $60 million exit. Another guy had like $120 million exit, and these were huge financial windfalls that they'd spent decades driving towards. Both of them were practically suicidal within 6 months of
Oh.
these exits. And the reason that's true is because their identity was attached to that thing, right? And people think about identity or ego being a good thing. And I think that anytime you attach your identity to something um, that is not, um, let's just say, something chosen. So, like, if I attach my identity to being a person of integrity, I think that's fine. If I attach my identity to being a person that's kind or loving, I think that can be very healthy. But if you attach your identity to being a successful entrepreneur or owning a mansion or having all these cars or having the beautiful wife or the successful kids or whatever, um, if your identity is attached to those things and then you don't have those things for whatever, you get divorced or there's a death or whatever might happen, now all of a sudden you suffer, enormously. And I think that people need to treat their identity like clothing and not like skin. And I feel like people get that wrong. I think they choose the wrong things as clothing and the wrong things as skin. And I think, and I've tried to be very intentional and thoughtful about that.
That is absolutely such gold because I think you're absolutely spot on for me as well. When I burnt out from my teaching career and I began to dissolve, I guess I was stripped because that was my whole identity was as this teacher. And so when that was stripped away, I just didn't know who I was or what I wanted and it took quite a few years to kind of to come back to well to become who I am today, I guess. But so that what you've said is really actually is hitting the nail on the head.
Like for
I-
me, like I was an exceptional athlete in high school, and then
oh,
I wrestled Division I in college, and on a good day I was mediocre. And my identity, as an athlete had no choice but to go away, and that
um,
was very painful for me. And because of that suffering, I analyzed it and I thought about it pretty deeply. And I made a different choice, and I decided to get very intentional about what was going to be skin and what was going to be clothing.
I love that analogy. I'm going to use that.
Yes.
When you talk about people who have made like 60 million pound exits or dollars and all of that, is there a consistent set of qualities for these people who create this kind of financial wealth? Yeah.
Yeah. So, um, I think it's changed. So, it used to be the path to creating that kind of wealth, let's just say 20 years ago, right? Is very different than it is now. Like pre-internet, post-internet, it's a huge difference. Um, one of the guys I mentor, he's 25 years old. He's CEO of his first company. He just started it last August. We'll have a 9-figure exit middle of next year. And he only started the business last August. That was not a thing 25 years ago. Like there was no way to do that, right? So I think that the paths to that kind of financial, wealth, um, there are way more ways to do that now than there were before. I think even with AI too, like, they're claiming that because of AI, there will be the first billionaire that's a solo company of one person using AI to do everything else. So I think that the game, the rules of the game are changing. I think historically, um, it was being able to play the long game.
Um,
Um, was what was sort of required. You weren't gonna build, 50, 100, $500 million business, in a year or 2. I'm not saying that's common, but now it's possible to do that. There are people who made that much money, buying Bitcoin, early on, right? So there's just a whole bunch of ways to create even generational wealth. Um, and I think that's part of the problem is because there are some examples of people that have taken a shortcut, if you will, right? That we live in the world of Ozempic and, GLP-1s and all of that is, well, hey, let me take a shot and take a pill instead of going to the gym and watching what I eat. And, with social media, our attention spans continue to shrink. So I think that that's part of the challenge is people have become intoxicated with the possibility of it happening just like that. And it does occasionally.
Mm,
Um, but that's not the norm. And the person who wins, the thing that's interesting about it is if you can be more thoughtful and intentional about what you do in the near term and the medium term, you can guarantee success. That wasn't true 25 years ago, but it's never been more true than it is today. And I think people think it's the opposite, but it's because they just don't have enough of an understanding of how much things like the internet and social media and AI are changing the rules of the game.
yeah. So, what industry is that young mentee in?
He has an app called MenuFit. It's
Wow.
basically, you basically any restaurant, any language, and you tell like it knows you're keto or Mediterranean or carnivore, and then it suggests the healthiest thing to eat at those restaurants. He's already done like I think almost 1.5 million downloads since August.
Wow.
Yeah, and again, it was he had never run anything, you know,
Yeah.
and he went from being a social media influencer for another app. He came up with his own app idea. He used AI to get the first version done, and here we are. 8 months later, company today is probably worth 40 or 50 million, but we'll have 100 to $150 million exit within a year.
I love that. And I love, so what would you say then to somebody who is using a tech, a sort of guy in a tech world who's using AI? What do you think the best route is for them to apply AI to creatively create something for humanity or themselves?
Well, the thing that's so interesting about it is, and again, believe it or not, so when I graduated from college in 1988, when dinosaurs still roamed the earth, um, my degree was in computer science, and believe it or not, my concentration was in artificial intelligence
Wow.
back in 1988. Now it was a very different thing. Yeah, it was a very different thing then than it is now, but I have a very unusually deep grasp of AI for someone who's 60, and
Mm,
my understanding of it is is that the beauty of it, and this is what I don't think people fully embrace and understand, is you can outsource all the crappy things about, the creative process and keep the things that are the fun and exciting part. So I'll give you
mhm.
2 examples. Um, my wife had given me this idea for a children's book. Um, we have this cute little 3.5 pound teacup poodle named Cavi, short for caviar, bougiest name possible. But anyway, we call him Cavi. So my wife had this idea where Cavi, because he hears me mentoring people all the time, he's absorbed all this business knowledge and he finds children and he tries to help coach them. So he'll find 2 girls that like have a struggling lemonade stand and he'll help them with their business model, right? But he can only talk to kids when there's no adults around. So
Brilliant.
my wife gave me this idea, and we were in Mexico City over the holidays, over New Year's, and she'd gone to sleep early, and she just planted the idea in my head. In 2 hours, I had written an entire children's book, and including all of the artwork for it, for the book, and it's good. Like, it's not just okay, like, it's really good. I've
Mm,
child tested the book. I've now written 3 of them. And I can't draw a straight line with a ruler. I have no artistic ability whatsoever. But with AI, I'm Picasso. I'm a
yeah.
Rembrandt. Um,
Yes.
the other example was my dad and I, so my dad's 84 and he's retired. And we were spending time together and he was, you know, lamenting the fact that he doesn't have any reason to get out of bed in the morning. He's bored. And so I said, "Well, hey, Dad, if you could do anything, what would you do?" He's like, "Well, I want to make the world a nicer place. I want it to be people to be nicer to each other." So I came up with this idea called 30 Acts of Kindness. So we set up a not-for-profit, 501(c)(3 here, and my dad, 84-year-old father, used AI to code the MVP of the app. I did a 3-hour brainstorming session with AI and came up with an entire 100-page business plan for 30 Acts of Kindness. I couldn't have done it in 3 months what I did in 3 hours, and my
Mm,
dad coded this entire app for a couple of $100 in, like, 10 days. Normally,
yes.
that would have cost 100 grand and taken us a year to do.
Yeah.
So, AI is this unbelievable force multiplier if you know how to embrace it. And the problem is most people don't. They treat AI like they treat Google. If you just
Yeah.
type, "Hey, what's a good movie this weekend?" and you ask AI versus you ask Google and you get a similar answer. But if you know how to leverage AI, the power is unbelievable.
Yes. Brilliant. Oh, I feel so excited. I'm like, oh, what's going on? What can I create? What can I create? Um, okay. Let's move into survival patterns in business, or yeah, the identity, the hidden identity that creates visible, shows up in the systems and culture. So let's have a look. What's the most exciting question? Okay, this is a great one. What distinguishes leaders who build empowered teams from leaders who accidentally build dependency?
So, leadership is probably the thing that the single biggest failure in businesses is a failure of leadership.
Yeah.
I would say, I mean, if you put a gun to my head and I had to put a percentage on it, because the failure rate it's one of the few things that has a higher failure rate than marriage is businesses,
Mm,
right? Let's call the failure rate something like 80%. It's probably higher. Um, if I had to guess, something like 80% of those failures are leadership failures. 90 my experience is 90% of all business problems can be solved. 10% of the time you're screwed, but 90% of the time there's a solution. The other, huge percentage of the time the businesses fail, it's a failure of leadership. And I think the reason that's true is in the same way the kind of person who wants to be a police officer maybe shouldn't be, the kind of person who wants to be a politician probably shouldn't be. Like if you really want power, maybe you shouldn't have it. I feel like,
yeah.
leadership, being CEO of a company, there's a lot of psychopathy in the C-suite. People that are drawn to be in charge, to be the person who's telling people what to do, tends to draw people that have more of those dark triad characteristics, unfortunately. And and then you have a lot of examples, someone like an Elon Musk or a Steve Jobs. These are incredibly, um, you know, successful people, obviously, these are not nice guys. I have a
Mm,
friend of mine who worked for Elon for 11 years. Not a nice guy. Now,
mm,
they're successful in spite of their poor leadership, not because of it, right?
mm,
And so that's the role model that other people look to and they're like, "Oh, well, that's how I'm supposed to be. I'm supposed to be a a selfish jerk, and that's going to get me and I'm going to pound the table, do as I say." Um, for us mere mortals, right? Regular normal people, my experience is if you can be a servant leader,
yeah,
really a servant leader,
yeah,
that is what gets the best result for normal people, for like us regular people. Um, I've had people that have worked for me at 5, 6 different companies.
yeah,
I've had people that worked for me get job offers at double or even triple the salary that my company was paying them, and they didn't take the job.
yes,
Um, and and the reason is because I always put the employee first and the company second. And the reason I do that is not because I'm not honoring my fiduciary responsibilities, is because I know what will get the best result for the company is putting the employee first. It's counterintuitive.
yeah,
And it's not even close. Like it's just not even close. We've all worked for that boss that really cares about us, and there's nothing we wouldn't do for that person. And we've
yeah,
also worked for the boss that doesn't give a crap about us. And even if you're a really self-motivated, self-directed person, they're still not getting your absolute best. And
Yeah.
you need them to do something on the weekend or, whatever. They're not gonna do that if you don't care about them, but if you care about them, you won't even have to ask.
Yeah. No, when you work for somebody, I mean, just honoring people, giving praise, recognition, it just goes so far. I've worked for some really bad bosses, and I led a school where the leadership team was just, the turnover was just so high, and the systems and the culture, and it was just people were scared. It was a culture of fear. And
Yeah.
so when I came in as a consultant to shift the culture and the things, servant leadership was the thing, and suddenly people wanted to show up because suddenly they felt inspired, because their talents on their unique gifts were being highlighted, and also they were trusted and respected. So when someone's trusted and respected to do their thing, they actually want to do more, because that autonomy, I think people just want autonomy as well. um
It does come down to hiring correctly and
ah,
firing quickly when it's the wrong hire. One of the rules that I just live by, and it's when I mentor people, I really, encourage them to do this too, is if you're the leader, you should absorb as much blame as possible
yeah.
and deflect as much credit as possible. And if you do that, the people that work for you will love you.
Mm. But they should be doing that, because obviously, like, leadership sets the tone for everything. So kind of, the buck stops with, well, I think a good leader, it's like, okay, this is my responsibility, and it creates trust as well.
It does.
Um,
Trust is huge. Yeah.
what do you what have you learned about emotional regulation, for yourself and watching other founders who operate under pressure?
My experience is that, I mean, every business hits speed bumps, right? I mean, I don't know if you know the story about Federal Express, but they didn't have enough. They didn't have enough money to. I think it was to pay for the shipping that they had coming due in a couple days. They just had an investment, crater at the last minute, and so their CEO literally went to Las Vegas, went to a casino, and played, took the last $5,000 they had, and I think he played blackjack till he made like 30 grand, which was enough to cover their expenses. And but for that, there'd be no Federal Express. Most companies maybe don't have exactly that kind of story, but most businesses will hit speed bumps. And my experience is that um, the thing that destroys a business isn't the unexpected thing that happens. It's the overreaction or the underreaction to that event. So I'll
Mm,
tell you a personal story about that. I had just started as CEO of this Forex trading company in Miami. My very first day, we lost 60% of our customers and 60% of our revenue the first day I started. Now, would have been easy to panic, right? But what good is panic gonna do? And not only that, but everyone's looking to the CEO of the company. It's like, when a kid falls down in front of their parents, and then they look up at their parents, and if their parents freaking out, they cry, and if their
mm,
parents chill, they're like, they're fine. They just dust themselves off and go back to playing. Business isn't so different than that. If you freak out, then everyone else is going to freak out, and no one thinks more clearly when they're freaking out.
mm,
So, go back to the fact that the thing that always calms me is, like I said before, I know 90% of the time that there's a solution to the problem.
mm,
If it's that 10%, there's nothing I can do about it anyway. So getting upset and anxious about it's not going to help. So, and 90% is pretty good odds. So let me focus on all the things I can control and just chip away at it. That company, within 6 months, we'd gotten all the revenue back, plus like another 30 or 40%. And we had our best like 6 months in revenue in the company's history. So, but partly because I didn't panic.
mm. So what you're saying is that you've got the presence of mind and the presence in your nervous system to be able to go, okay, let me strategically look at what's going on. Is that what you're saying? Because, like,
Well,
what is that muscle that you're talking about that people have to
I mean,
develop?
I think having played sports, for all those years and having some high pressure situations probably tuned me to it a little bit. But frankly, it really was more logic than everything else. Meaning, it's it's just a logical problem. I'm a very logical, rational person, and so I'm like, well, I know freaking out is not going to help. So, and I know there's a whole bunch of things out of my control. Well, Why would I focus any of my attention and energy on the things I can't control? Let
Mm,
me first evaluate what things I can control. One, let me assess what the damage is
mm,
first. So I'm clear eyed about what the problem is. The
mm,
second thing is, let me identify every last lever I can possibly pull that I have control over, and I'm only going to focus all my time and attention there. I know that that is going to maximize whatever the comeback to that problem is going to be. And
mm.
so it's just a logic problem for me. And again, it's just through repetition that that's where I go automatically. Just from experience, I guess.
Yeah. And when you've looked at people over decades, what predicts long-term success most accurately? Do you think it's intelligence, work ethic, strategy, emotional maturity, or something else, or a combination of all three, four?
I mean, obviously, it's good to have everything, right? But I think intellect is over indexed. People think it's more about. And look, if you're Elon Musk and you're trying to put rockets on Mars, yeah, you got to be really freaking smart, right? Like, I would not be a good guy to be running SpaceX. But for most businesses, probably 110, 120 IQ is more than enough. You don't need to be some super genius. It really comes down I think it's to two things. The ability to have discipline, right? And to be able to delay gratification, meaning, if you only have a short-term focus, you're gonna resource allocate poorly.
Mm,
And so if you're trying to do something of scale, right, you have to be thinking short term, medium term, and long term. And I'll give you an example too, like the menu fit example I mentioned. Part of the reason we're going to have that nine-figure exit is, um, you know, I made sure that the CEO, that one of the things we did was we came into 2026. Now, mind you, the company was only 4 months old, um, you know, at the beginning of this year. I made sure that we had a budget for 2026. Um, Most companies that are 5 years old, 10 years old, that are doing under 25 million don't have a budget. But if you try to have a plan, now we use that budget and forecasting model for a few things. We use it um, for very short-term cash management reasons. Because the App Store holds our money for 60 days. It creates real challenges when you're high growth. So it allows us to manage that effectively. But it also allows us to talk to investors and talk about what our plan was versus what the results were. So it helps us in the short term, it helps us in the medium term, and it will help us on exit. So, and that's just one example, but I think people that really build something meaningful, from a financial standpoint, they have to be able to resource allocate across the short, the medium, and the longer term.
brilliant. Um, I guess, like, the last few questions, when you're evaluating a mentor, a mentee, because I was going to ask this about founders, but actually, let's look at it from a mentor perspective. What are the qualities that you look for beyond business itself?
I mean, the number one thing, the two most important things to me, and they're connected, that if I'm going to mentor someone, have to be true. They have to have humility, and they have to be coachable.
Mm,
Right? And interestingly, um, the older someone gets, the harder it is to find someone who's coachable. The kids that
mm,
are younger are definitely much more coachable than the ones that are older.
mm,
Um, and and I guess the other part that's critical for me personally is they have to have a good moral compass. That's just a requirement. So, because if I don't, you know, one of my rules of thumb too is I always have agreements in place, but if I wouldn't do a deal without the agreement, like on a handshake, then I don't want to do the deal, right? Whether that's being an advisor or shareholder, investor, whatever, like I have to feel about this person that I would do the deal on a handshake. I'm not going to do the deal on a handshake, but I would do the deal on a handshake,
yeah,
if you know what I mean. And
yeah,
so that's what I'm looking for. Because ultimately, if I don't think I can make a real impact, I have no interest in mentoring someone. Like, what good is it if I'm not going to be able to be helpful?
yeah. I love that rule of thumb as well, because you can just, it's an intuitive thing for you that you can just sense it, or or do you, yeah, discern.
Well, you know what it is? Like, in most cases, I would say the majority, in fact, now that I think about it, all of the people that I'm mentoring, it wasn't like, we met once, we talked once, and, "Hey, I'm gonna do this." It was more of a, you know, we dated for a little bit, if you will, got to know each other a little bit. Um, and then I just, I mean, don't get me wrong, I listen to what people say, but I really pay attention to how people act.
Yeah.
And my experience is that it doesn't matter what kind of relationship, professional, personal, romantic, that you don't really understand what someone's like until something really good happens and something really bad happens. When
Mm,
something good happens, they become obnoxious, full of themselves, whatever. Or can they keep some humility even when things are going well? And when things go bad, do they own any of it? Or are they always deflecting blame to other people? And so that's always one of the guideposts that I pay a lot of attention to is, in the beginning of those relationships when, because invariably things go better than you think sometimes and worse than you think in others. And I just pay careful attention to all that.
yeah. Such great advice. It's full of gold, full of gold. Um, okay. What do you think of this statement? Every operational problem is eventually an identity problem.
Every operational problem is an identity problem. Um, maybe it's because I'm thinking of a different definition of those two terms, but I don't. I think operational problems generally come from poor planning,
Right.
right? More than they do identity. Um, but I do think that, in fact, I joke, and I think it's mostly true that the most curious, even if the most curious person in the room is the dumbest person, eventually they will be the smartest person. The most curious person usually wins. And and so to the identity point, I do see people make a lot of operational mistakes because they're emotionally invested in being the smartest person in the room, of thinking they have all the answers. Look, I'm very experienced, okay? I have 35 years of experience. I've had some big exits. I'm still wrong something like 30% of the time, at least, right? Um, and so how can I be so sure this isn't part of that 30%? So I have very strong positions loosely held. And I
Mm,
think that's the right way to be because as a leader, you do have to take a position and take a strong position. But you don't want to be your ego and you don't want to be emotionally invested in that position. And when I see people make operating and strategic mistakes, it's frequently because they think they're supposed to have the answer. They became emotionally invested, in their answer, in this their solution or their operational, approach to something. I remember years ago, the 9-figure exit was a telemedicine company that I ran for 5 years, and um, we Teladoc was the 800-pound gorilla in our space. They were publicly traded, so they had an amazing balance sheet. They had 90% market share. We had like 0.01% market share, um, and we charged 10 times as much as Teladoc did.
mm.
And for 5 years, 100% of our customers came from Teladoc, and we never lost a customer. And that was because we took a different approach than anyone else in the space. And when I would have conversations with leaders of other companies that they'd be like, well, that can't work. That won't work. I'm like, it is working. What are you talking? But again, their ego was no. They can't have figured something out we didn't figure out. So it's so funny because everyone else was worried about them copying us. I'm like, they're too arrogant to copy us. They'd have to admit we're smarter than they are, and they're not going to do that. So I think a lot of operational problems can come from ego for sure.
I love that, and I had a guest on a few weeks ago, and she was talking about the third way. And that just reminds me of that, like not being so closed off and limited into this, like attached, as you say, to this one way of thinking or this idea. But actually, what? Because she was in a situation where I think they were in a really sticky situation as well, where they didn't have the money to pay their staff, and they were going to have to let go of people, and the whole thing was collapsing. And she was like, "No, no, no, there's got to be another way." And it's so, but opening up to that possibility allowed to find a solution, and things got sorted out. Because I think one of her other co-founders were like, "Oh no, this is the only thing." Da, 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 being attached, being attached.
Yeah. Well,
Okay, well, I guess my final question before you choose what you would like to leave people thinking, what mistake do you think people make in negotiations?
um, I think the biggest mistake people make in negotiations is they think it's something that should be won, right? Um, I will intention there are occasionally negotiations that are a one-time and only one-time negotiation, but very few really fall into that category. And the reality is, you don't even know, except in hindsight, whether this is the last time you're ever going to have to negotiate with this person. So, I think it's important to not necessarily get the best deal, but to get a fair deal, right? And not only that, but and I give this advice to all the people that I mentor, that whenever you're dealing in a new business relationship, one of the most important things to understand about that person is this person generally a fair-minded person, right? Fair-minded, when you have a problem with someone and that person is fair-minded, you can almost always find a solution, right?
Mhm.
But when you're dealing with someone and they're not fair-minded, all bets are off.
Yeah.
And I'll give you an example. Years ago, the eight-figure exit company that we had, I was president. The CEO is not a nice guy. And he had negotiated this deal. So we had 100 million articles from like 3,000 different publications, and we got about 50 million from one company and another 50 million from another company. And one of the companies, our CEO had negotiated a deal that was a really good deal for us, but a really bad deal for the providers. So bad that they were losing money on the deal, and a lot of money. And so they came back to us and they said, "Look, we understand this is what we negotiated, but we're asking you in good faith to modify the agreement so that we're not losing money on this."
Mm,
Okay. And the CEO basically was like, tough shit. Right.
mm,
And so guess what happened? So 2.5, 3 years later, that contract ran out. And when they came back, they quadrupled our price. And they would have only doubled the price if it had been a fair-minded, but because, our CEO had stuck it to them the first time, he wasn't going to agree to the quadrupling. It didn't make sense to us to take the quadruple cost. So we lost half of our content and half our revenue.
yeah.
So this great deal that he negotiated, not such a great deal. And,
Mm,
again, you don't always know except in hindsight. If instead you just deal with people in a fair-minded way and you come to a fair deal versus the best deal you can possibly get. In fact, people, when you go out of your way to be fair with someone, so you're negotiating a contract, hey, look, I just realized this indemnification, doesn't cut both ways. Let's make sure that it protects both of us, right?
yes.
And you go out of your way to do stuff like that. They're like, oh, this is a guy I want to work with.
So much of what you say, and I'm not trying to ascribe it somewhere else, but I I've been obsessed with the 7 Habits of Effective People all my life. So like that was the book that I
Great book.
still study to this day. And so much of what you say, the circle of concern and the win-win and all the win-win-win. That's it. I mean, that is just timeless principles that you operate from when you have that, as you said, the moral compass, and it will stand you in good stead, especially if you want to create meaningful
Well,
relationships.
the part about it that I think that's so funny is even if you were just a selfish prick, you should pretend like you're a nice guy because the nice guy gets the better result.
Yeah.
It's when people like working with you, they trust you, everything goes smoother, you know? When I
Mm,
have problems, I just have to have a conversation and the
mm.
problem usually goes away.
But the people who are not the nice people, okay, but they are operating from that wounded perspective, though, aren't they? Like they've got these survival mechanisms that are created. I think, yeah, I think I don't. I'm not sure how many people are actually nice in inverted commas that haven't done a lot of internal work to examine themselves. Do you think that's fair or not?
I don't get me wrong.
Yeah,
There's plenty of crappy people in the world. There's
yeah,
dishonest people, so on and so forth. But my feeling about humanity is I feel
yeah,
like most people in most circumstances will behave reasonably well.
yeah,
And that most people in horrible circumstances will
yeah,
behave badly.
yeah.
That's my general experience. And you occasionally find exceptions to those, to that generality.
Mm,
Um, but my experience is if I'm fair-minded with the other person, they're generally gonna be fair-minded back, and like I said, if they're not, I know that early on, and then I choose not to do business with them. Or if I do business with them, I do it with a clear understanding that this deal could go sideways at any point. And so, I have a backup plan. Again, it's like, I always hope for the best and plan for the worst. And so that's why I think it's so important to identify early on whether someone is a fair-minded person or not, because it ripples through all the rest of your relationship, in my opinion.
Agreed. Just this is just randomly coming into my mind. So we can see now AI is like um the trajectory is that things are going to shift very, very quickly for and potentially for many people who can now go out and build something that they couldn't do like 10 years ago. What do you think we should be teaching in schools? Is there a place for school anymore?
So, I practically begged my daughter not to go to college, and she's 26, so that was 8 years ago, right? Even makes even less sense now. I
Mm,
mean, I don't know what it costs, on the other side of the pond, but, here to go to a private college, 150, 200, $250,000, and
yeah,
kids are going into debt to
yeah,
get a mediocre education from
yeah.
mediocre teachers in a classroom. I mean, we're teaching people the same way we taught 200 years ago. And now, I mean, the reality is there is, and if you take like a really, really any, like a really technical topic, like maybe engineering, like building a bridge or something, that I couldn't become an expert in. But pretty much, let's say, email marketing or social media management or whatever. If you gave me 90 days, I could become an expert in almost anything, right?
Mm,
In 90 days between AI and the internet. I could become an expert in almost up in the top 10th of the top 1% in the world in 90 days on almost any subject matter. That wasn't true. When I was growing up, you had to go to a library and
mm.
check out a book that there were no book reviews for. You didn't even know if the book was any good, right? Or go to a bookstore. You couldn't go to Amazon and say, gee, how many 4-star reviews did it get? Like that wasn't a thing.
Yeah.
And so the ability to accumulate knowledge and I would argue if done properly, even wisdom is, you know, galaxies better than it was 25 years ago. And so I think that I think the next 10 or 15 years with AI is going to be very bumpy for a lot of people. Um, but I also think there's never been more opportunity for that, let's call it 20% that really embrace it and understand how to leverage it. I think for the other 80%, it's going to be a rough time. But for that
Mhm.
20%, and the reality is anyone who wants to be could be in that 20%.
Yeah. Yes, I love it. So exciting. Okay, so is there any kind of I haven't asked a question. Is there a final thing you want people to think about today?
Um, you know, I think that I guess the last thing, one of the things I want to leave people with is when I really thought about it, something like, it's probably not 100%, but something like 95% of all problems can be avoided if you can just be honest with yourself and honest with everybody else.
Mm,
And again, it sounds really easy to do and hard, and it sounds easy, but it's hard to do. The reality is that the problem is that if you can't do the first part, if you can't be honest with yourself, being honest with other people is impossible. And I
mm,
and I think that that is the single biggest blind spot that most people have is self-awareness and
yeah.
really being able to be honest with yourself. Because if you're honest with yourself about a bad job or a bad relationship or a bad friendship or whatever, then you have to do something about it. And so most people stop their emotions, they, pretend it's better than it is or whatever it might be. And I just think that if people were a little bit more intentional and really took the time to um, be honest with yourself about everything, so many problems could be avoided. I mean, I was just talking to my daughter this afternoon. She's in a professional situation. She's very, very unhappy. And and the part that's frustrating for me as her father, wanting her to be happy,
Mm,
is she is the warden of her own prison. She can
yeah.
let herself out anytime she wants to, but she can't see it.
Yes.
Maybe eventually she'll be able to, but right now, and it's weird because intellectually, I think she does understand it, but emotionally, and I think that really is the part that's so difficult. People that don't know me well, sometimes will even refer to me as like robotic, right?
Mm,
I am the most emotional man I know. Like I cry at TV commercials, right?
mhm,
Um, I'm very in touch with my emotions. With that being said, I can pull myself out of it, take myself out of those emotions and look at things reasonably objectively. but I'm also objective enough to know I can't be perfectly objective. So even that, right, requires a certain level of humility. Like, yeah, I'm a reasonably smart guy, and yes, I'm reasonably objective, but am I really sure I'm looking at this objectively? So what do I do to help protect myself from those blind spots? I have people that I trust completely to always be honest with me, and I bounce it off of my wife, my brother, my dad, my daughter, close friends of mine. And then I'm able to triangulate on the truth because I'm open to hearing, even if it's not what I want to hear.
Beautiful. That is so important and powerful advice. I have a question then. I have more
Yeah.
questions.
What do you want? At
What
your
is is there a question that you ask yourself frequently to keep you in that to out without going outside of yourself? Is there a question that you ask to clarify your blind spots?
I'm almost well, that really so that is my, my obsession is I'm so and I'll tell you why. There are people that were intellectual heroes of mine, someone like a Sam Harris, maybe to a lesser extent, someone like a Jordan Peterson. These are people that are very intelligent, much higher IQs than me. The problem is they have blind spots you could drive a truck through, right? And so I'm like, well, if these people that are so much smarter than me, if they have these big blind spots, am I so arrogant that I think I don't have any? So I'm almost paranoid
Mm,
about looking for those blind spots. But I think because I'm open to having them, even being paranoid about having them, when, my wife or someone close to me brings something to my attention, I'm pretty open to it because I'm looking for it myself. I can't necessarily see it on my own, but when it's brought to me, I can embrace it because I'm open to it.
yes. Okay. So you have that openness and that growth mindset, and so and you have people that are you're creating safety around being able to um for people to be able to mirror and reflect to you things that you might need to shift. Okay, now that comes down to what you're saying about being coachable as well, I think.
Well, the honestly, the challenge that I have is, because I'm old and because reasonably successful. In fact, because my wife's a good bit younger than me, and when I was working on my TED Talk, if she got so sick of hearing me practice it, I thought she was gonna divorce me. But, um, you know, she had, obviously I asked her opinion, and at first she was reluctant to give me advice because she's thinking, "Well, what do I know? Like you know, 25 years more experienced than me. He's she's not really in the corporate world. What do I know? I'm sure he's right and I'm sure I'm wrong. But thankfully, I mean, she gave me by far the best advice. In fact, the best line in my TED talk was hers, which, she's of course very happy to remind me. Um, but for your listeners, I'll share it here. It's the measure of a life isn't what you build, it's who you leave better. So
Mm,
best line of my talk was hers. So all credit to her. But
be
anyway, it's, you know, the harder part for me is encouraging the people around me, like, dude, tell me if I'm wrong. Like, if you think this could be better, like, you're not going to insult me, and I might disagree with you, but we'll just have a conversation about it. Um, and so I feel like that, that's actually the bigger hurdle I have is people don't want to, you know, they give me more credit than they should. I guess is better say it a better way.
I love that, and I because what you're talking about is how easy it is to pedestal people, and yeah, because I'll give you an example as well from me. When you came through, when your media company or whoever came through, I was like, who am I to interview this guy? And then I was like, well, who am I not? And then I was like, what conversation does my audience need? So I had to like put myself because I was like, oh, this is great. Like you're an amazing guest. And then I was like, so what could I ask? And then I was like, it's not about that. It's about what conversation can I help facilitate that my audience will get value from? And it just shifted everything within me.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just feel really, really happy and really grateful to have this conversation. But it's that thing that you're saying, like go in with an open heart, I think. And
It's the thing it's embarrassing how late in my life and career it took me to realize this, but the two characteristics I look for above all else are curiosity and humility.
yeah,
And because you really can't have a growth mindset. It's almost impossible to have a growth mindset without curiosity and humility.
yeah. What was your TED talk on?
It was my misdiagnosis. So basically, um, so I had 3 different doctors misdiagnose me and tell me I had 6 months to live. So and it took about a month from the first misdiagnosis till they're like, "Oops, sorry, we screwed up. You're gonna be fine." Um, and, uh, um, and basically how that changed the lens I saw myself through and the world through. And that's really what made me into a servant leader,
Mm,
and got me to be externally focused. And it was interesting to me, that when I stopped chasing success, it found me, I think, faster than it would have if I continued to chase it, and it sure made it a heck of a lot, more enjoyable on the journey.
mm. Brilliant. And I think that really sums up a lot of this whole conversation. I think if I extract everything, it is you're somebody who is saying detach. And I wouldn't say surrender because I don't think you're like surrender and let go, but you're definitely a man who says follow. I guess follow your internal compass rather than chasing. So there's this. Is that does that make sense?
I think that if you're seeking the validation externally,
Yeah.
that's a hole that never gets filled, you know?
Mm,
And I am completely comfortable in my own skin. I'm far from perfect, but, you know, I'm sad. I feel so fortunate, honestly, so fortunate. My life has turned out completely different than I planned. Not
mm,
that my plan was bad, right? But it turned out better than I thought it would. And my plan was already for it to turn out pretty good. And it at some degree, I think maybe I did what I did was I surrendered to the outcome. I'm
mm,
like, I can control the effort. And I guess the thing that really taught me about that was, being a really good college wrestler was super important to me. Even though I went to an Ivy League school and I should have been focused on my education, I was way more focused on being a great wrestler, which I just wasn't. Like, I was
mm,
very good in high school and I was very mediocre in college. And, um, and it was not for lack of effort. Like, I could not have tried harder, right? But even that, like, I don't look back on my college career and being like, "Oh, I shouldn't have done that." I'm just like, you know, it wasn't in the cards. Like, it wasn't like I didn't have to have any doubts like, "Oh, if I'd practiced harder or if I went to the weight room more or if I, ate better, like, then maybe I would have done better." No, I did everything in my power and, and still just did okay. And that's okay. Like, my point is, like, I focus on the effort, and the result won't always turn out the way. Actually, my TED Talk's a perfect example. I had to
mm,
apply to over 200 TED Talks before I got picked. Okay, most people would have given up at 20, 50, right, 100. And then I spent probably 300 or 400 hours practicing my TED Talk. Um, 'Cause I'm like, "Look, there's a whole bunch of things out of my control, but there's some things in my control, and I'm gonna manage the heck out of that," and it turns out how it turns out.
yeah. I love that. I love, love, love that. Thank you so much for your time and your wisdom and everything today. And yeah, I think that's it. So I always ask my listeners if there's, let's have a conversation. No one ever comments, but if you're out there, do comment and let's have a conversation. Let's carry on the conversation.
Well, Jess, I really appreciate the questions and having me on, and, if I'm able to help even one of your, followers, nothing would make me more happy.
Yeah, I'm sure you will. There is so much gold in here. I know you will.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for having me.
Thank you.